Well, good morning. Welcome back after your Easter weekend, and good morning to you, Chewy. How are you, man?
Morning, mate. Good, very good.
I struggle. I don't know about you, but I struggle not to go bam, 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 bam when that music's playing. And even though our mics are turned off, there's actually a way you can turn the mics on when that plays. And I'm a bit concerned one day I'm going to click the wrong button, and in the background I'm going to be going bam, 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 because I struggle with that. Did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, not a bad one. Obviously worked all the way through. Well, apart from the stat days. But God, the weather on the days off was cracker.
I know, it's almost. You always got to tell people, like, I'm looking straight out my studio. I've got glass doors at my studio, and then a ranch slider, and all I can see is sun. And of course, you always say to people, "Well, this is every day in Dunedin, obviously."
Oh,
I mean,
I mean, it's a secret, but yeah.
I actually have to say I like winter best in Dunedin, apart from anything else, because even though obviously it's much colder, but you do get a much higher proportion of blue sky days and sun. So it's actually my favorite time of year. And I moved down, a decade ago or so from West Auckland, and one of the things that drew me to Dunedin was during winter, the rainfall in Dunedin is 1/3 of what the rainfall was in where I lived in West Auckland for winter. So yes, it's colder, but it's much drier. And I do love those crisp blue sky days in the middle of June. My favorite time of year.
Nice.
It's very easy to get warm. Pull a hoodie on, put a fire on, look out the window. It's a bit more difficult when it's a 35-degree day to get cool, in my opinion. So today, thanks for joining us today, everybody, and thanks for being a part of the show. We've got a few things we're going to talk about today. We're going to start off talking about the supermarket duopoly. High prices are locking people out of nutrition, a health group says. We've actually got a spokesperson for that health group, Dr. Lisa T. Morenga, coming on to have a chat about it. It's Health Coalition Aotearoa Food Policy Expert Group co-chairperson will be coming on to have a chat about that. I mean, this story kind of broke, a couple of weeks ago? We might have even talked about this once or twice, Chewy.
Yeah, I think we did. Certainly with the Commerce Commission.
Yeah, it was about that report.
And
it's not just that they're making money, they're making what they call super profits. So I think there's like a industry standard around the world, which is 5-6% profits for a supermarket or for a food supplier. And I thought it was like 14% that New Zealand supermarkets were making, but I read the report or the article yesterday, and it's more like 12%. So the government's kind of saying, well, you guys are making 12% when you should only be making 6%. It does raise all sorts of interesting questions around business and how businesses run and how much money you're quote unquote allowed to make. And then when you bring in a good that is also, a human right, or certainly a human necessity of food, should there be some kind of, restrictions on that? And so that's the whole conversation, as opposed to buying a widget for your new car, which you don't need, and blah, 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 blah. So we'll be jumping into that, and also not to depress anybody, but we're also going to be having a look at Omicron and COVID today, only because they're starting to project the next wave, if there is going to be a next wave. And I have to say, from living in the deep south, that I'm getting incredibly frustrated that Southern DHB is 7% of the population, and still daily we are over 12% of the new cases. And it feels like that there is a good portion of the people in the deep south going, fuck this whole thing. We'll just live our life now and not worry about it. And I'm seeing people every day continue it on. I said to someone yesterday, and I know it's being a bit silly, but that first lockdown, when the world went inside for a month, if the world did that today, Omicron wouldn't exist anymore.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that's going to happen or that's a feasible way of doing it, but it feels like the continuation of the lackadaisical nature about it now, certainly in the deep south, is one of the things that's keeping it over proportionally high here. So we'll have a bit of a squiz at that as well. And also, I suspect it's one of our new favorite politicians out of Australia. He's the leader of the Greens. His name's Adam Brandt. And it's really a conversation around gotcha questions from politicians. Yeah, if you haven't seen the video yet with him telling a reporter to just Google it, mate, we'll play that for you and have a bit of a chat about what is a gotcha question and what isn't a gotcha question, and when should a politician, if ever, know the price of a litre of milk or a one-stage bus fare, and when shouldn't they? Because I think there's criterias around that, and there are things where you can actually say it's appropriate for that to know that exact answer there, and at that point, it's a gotcha question.
Yeah.
So we'll look at maybe some other stuff as well. There's actually quite a lot going on now in our shared document this morning about what we could. We might have some other things as well. But let's kick it off with supermarket duopolies. Really, well, it's actually based around the Commerce Commission report that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but also an article on stuff.co.nz. Supermarket duopoly high prices locking people out of nutrition, health group says. Rather than going through all the exact details of the health coalition Aotearoa Food, let's just bring on Dr. Lesa Te Morenga, who is the Policy Expert Group co-chairperson, also an associate professor at Massey University, whose research relates. Now, get this: if you want a person to speak to this exactly, you ready? Whose research relates to supporting individuals, whānau, and communities to achieve good health through being able to access healthy, affordable food. There couldn't be a better person to talk to about this, if you ask me. Lesa, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Atamari, lovely to join you.
Yeah, I noticed you were at you're in Otago for a while. Me and Chu were just wondering, why did you leave, God's Own? It's a hard thing to handle. People actually leave this place, but there you go.
I love Dunedin, and I did not want to leave at all. Gee, sorry, I've got some feedback hanging up here. I'm going to change my speaker. Is that better?
Yeah, we've got you fine on. You're fine on this end.
You can hear me, but I
can't
hear
fine
you.
on this end.
So let's try this.
Hello there. You're fine on this end. Just saying, so we can't hear whatever you're getting on your end.
That's right. It's just freaking me out because I can hear myself like half a second later. But
now we can hear the echo. Whatever, put it back on the first setting because we couldn't hear you then. Whatever the first setting was beautiful.
Okay.
That's much better on our end at least. If you can hear us, we can hear you. What we're going to do technology. What we're going to do to start off with is the story that I just had up on the screen. I do want to play 60 seconds of what Dr. Clark did say about this, because I think that's a part of the conversation. David Clark was talking about the Commerce Commission report, talking about the super profits that they're talking about, and getting asked also about taking GST off fresh fruit and veggies. Let's just give him 60 seconds to hear what he had to say, and then we'll get into the conversation as well.
Well, look, we've received the report from the Commerce Commission and accepted its findings. Its findings were that the supermarkets are making super profits. By its most conservative estimate, that's $1 million a day it's taking out of New Zealanders' pockets in super profits, ahead of what you'd normally expect as profits for that sector. So I have not ruled out going further than the Commerce Commission's recommendations. They've put together, to be fair, a pretty robust package of recommendations, 607 pages, covering off things like covenants on land and also introducing a regulator. They have a package of measures. We will give those consideration, and as I say, haven't ruled out going further. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, look, we're not considering removing GST off fruit and vegetables at this stage. We want to ensure that when savings are passed on from suppliers to the supermarkets, that they're actually passing on those savings to consumers. And that's the area we're really focused on.
So there you go. That's pretty much all I wanted to put out there. So they want to ensure that the savings that are getting passed on to the suppliers then get passed on to the consumer, and they're not considering at the moment, although I'd be willing to bet it'll change before the next election, taking GST off fresh fruit and veggies. Lesa, why don't we'll just kind of throw the floor to you at the moment, and you give us your thoughts around what we're hearing and reading, and then we might jump backwards and forwards with a few questions. So what is your reaction to the cost of food going up? And obviously, as we said, your area of research being having access to healthy, affordable food being more difficult currently.
Yeah. So the supermarket duopoly is a huge factor in the inaffordable or increasing inaffordability of food in New Zealand. Obviously, we're in a global pandemic. There's a whole lot of factors that are happening that we don't have a lot of control in New Zealand. But we do know that our supermarkets are making twice the amount of profit that supermarkets are making in other countries. And there should be some way that some of those profits can benefit our poorest families so that they can afford the sort of healthy food that we need to live long, productive lives. You know, we want our kids growing up healthy, successful, so they can pay our superannuation, don't we?
You say there should be some ways, like what? Some ways for those profits to be reduced. Have you have some examples? Does your working group kind of go from somewhat to then actually coming up with ways of doing that? Suggestions?
I mean, one of the things our group focuses on is sort of regulatory measures that the government could take to shift the balance between the real super affordability of junk food and the inaffordability of the healthy foods. So that's probably not an issue here. But looking at the supermarkets and what we can do there, you know, we accept some of the previous work and some of the consultation that was done with people for that Commerce Commission report with organisations that really felt strongly that we need a third player in New Zealand, another supermarket, because those two big supermarket chains are really acting in quite an uncompetitive way. So we're not seeing prices come down as much as they could. I think it's promising that David Clark hasn't ruled out doing something about that duopoly, even though the Commerce Commission report says that they think it's too complicated. So I'm going to cross my fingers here that he will go further than the report and make some of those hard choices or hard decisions that need to be made.
I mean, one of the things that has been battered around for many, many years, multiple governments, is removing GST from fruit and vegetables. And everybody's gone, no, that complicates a very easy tax system. It keeps on getting brought up. Is that going to fix everything?
Other countries don't have tax on healthy food like Australia, GST. In some countries, I believe, don't have GST on food at all. I think that it would be good not to have GST on healthy food or food. I mean, I'd like to see GST kept on chocolate and chippies, if only so that will make it less appealing for me to buy as well.
But I think that would be quite easy, though. I mean, if we think about what's in the foods, like if, for example, you said no additives, no preservatives, no colors, GST free. I mean, that's all of your meats, all of your veggies, all of your fruits. You know what I mean? It's like, and it doesn't include your chocolates and your ice cream. And like, I know that there's going to be some preservatives that help keep some meat products, for example, and so there'd be some tutuing in between. But in general, wouldn't that be a way of very easily defining what I know? Like they always talk in the UK about, I think it's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a kind of cake which is listed as a biscuit, even though it's a cake, because one of them has tax and one of them doesn't. They can get into those middle grounds. But if you made it like, basically something that comes from a farm, then there's no GST on it, then that would seem to be an easy way to, a farm or from nature. That would be an easy way to make that no GST thing.
It sounds easy in principle, but when we start to look at how we apply these sorts of rules and algorithms for deciding what food should be in and what should be out, it is a lot more complicated. I mean, butter comes from a farm, and we, as nutritionists, we'd rather people didn't eat quite so much butter. And I know there is some disagreement in some circles here, but we do think that too much saturated fat increases risk of heart disease. So we don't want necessarily all things coming from farms to be cheap. do we? And likewise, some things that are processed or packaged, like, I mean, bread is a staple food. It's going to have preservatives and things like that. But it's really important staple for New Zealanders. You know, we have quite a bread-based lunch culture. And, you know, we would like people to eat healthier bread than the white stodgy stuff.
Yeah.
But it would still be preserved. You know, you have preservatives and additives in it. So it's not as simple as it might seem.
No, I mean, one thing that I keep on coming back to is, as a country, we produce so much food for export, and all the best stuff heads overseas. And then we've got these companies going, oh, well, you know, you've got to pay the same price in New Zealand as we do overseas because it's the same quality, but we're not getting the export quality stuff. We seem to be sacrificing our land and water to make it. And then we're getting poor quality, expensive stuff in our expensive supermarkets. It blew me away last time I was in the UK, just seeing the range, the quality, and the cheapness of stuff. Like, we should be there, surely.
I mean, do bear in mind that in Europe, they do have a lot of food subsidies. So we probably can't do that as a very small country that is dependent on exporting food. You know, we can't afford to have countries block out exports into them. But one thing I think that we should consider as New Zealand is developing a new food strategy. So we don't have a strategy around how we're going to ensure that our own population is able to afford healthy, nutritious food into the future. And that's something different people are starting to work on. One thing I'd like to think about is, what can we do to ensure that New Zealanders don't pay more for New Zealand produced foods than companies are selling them overseas? You know, just that sort of level fairness, because I believe that actually we pay more for some of the foods that New Zealand produces. You know, it's not even that we're paying the same, we're paying more.
No, I used to do a late night radio show, and I'd often, because people would tune in from all over the world, and when like Fonterra came up, we'd be talking about 2 liters worth of milk that you're paying, I don't know, at the time it was 10 years ago, but you know, $4 for, and you get people from Perth going, oh, we pay $1.99 for the same product. And even with the exchange rate, it was still like, you know, half to 2/3 of what we were paying for them. And many people would phone up and go, that fucking plant is 4 kilometers down the road from me. And that would be one of the things that they would be angriest about.
Yeah, I mean, the Australians had, I think, a price war around milk. Every supermarket was trying to get to the cheapest milk in the market. It was a race to the gutter, pretty much. Here in New Zealand, we use alcohol in supermarkets as loss leaders. So, I mean, there's another attack that you go to the supermarkets. You can't loss lead with alcohol. Try doing it with fruit and veg instead.
Or with soft drinks or chips or confectionery. That would be a great strategy too. And I think some of those ideas are incorporated into the Commerce Commission report, like trying to make it easier for consumers to afford the healthiest food. But they could definitely go further.
Hey, I'd like to ask a couple of specific questions. The first is the talk about a third player coming in to break up the duopoly. Why do we think that will cause prices to go down? And I mean, I know I'm a bit of a simplistic kind of person here, but if I saw 2 restaurants in the Octagon making bank because they could, and I come in, why wouldn't I just want to make bank like them? Why would I go, I'm going to undercut them and then everyone will come to me? Like, what's the actual reason that third group is then going to cause prices to go down and them not just join in what the other 2 are doing?
Well, I'm not an economist, so you might get a better answer from someone like Bernard Hickey. But, you know, we have a relatively small market, and at the moment, those 2 big players are making a big profit because they've got access to all of that market. And as soon as you've got a bit more competition, you're going to want to steal some of the customers off those other 2 big players, aren't you? So you're probably not going to steal them as a new player in the market by offering the same prices. You're going to have to offer something new to bring those customers over to your business. So, you know, I think that third player would only come in if they could offer lower prices, and then that will drive those other 2 big players to
Yeah, all right. I see that. Also, I wanted to look real quickly at specifically to do this. Now, this is July of last year, but it's all I could find online. So let's add another 10% to these prices. But looking at what people are paying for their average groceries around the country, it's a lot more expensive in, for example, urban Auckland than it is in even the rest of the North Island, rest of urban North Island. It's like $60 cheaper to get their average groceries. I wanted to. But now you said you're not an economist, so maybe this is more an opinion-based question for the three of us, rather than being able to delve into why that is. But there was a couple of things. Is the government just kicking the can down the street? Because I look at, let's say it's a solo parent with one child, let's say, and this is their urban South Island. They're spending $175 a week. So if the profits of the supermarket go from 12% to 6%, so they save 6% on that. I mean, 10% would be $17. So that's like $8 or $9. Is $8 or $9 a week for that person the difference we're talking about between affordable, healthy food and not? And does it really have to be government intervention to make it to where it becomes affordable? Because if we're talking about a 6% difference between super profits to profits, it's maybe not a huge amount out of each person's weekly spend. And I wonder, when you hear the government going $430 million of profits, they're trying to make it sound bigger and put the blame over there, whereas the only group that can really bring the prices down is the government. So that's kind of my question is it really ultimately the government that need to solve this problem? And secondly, if we're all buying the same groceries, why is it so much cheaper in the rural area, $257.50 versus $395.80 in the urban Auckland area? And is that something that the government could help out with if it's based on rents or whatever? So either of you, there's just kind of some thoughts to throw out there.
Yeah, well, food cost is just one of the issues that are facing New Zealanders at the moment. And, I think if housing was a lot more affordable, then the cost of food wouldn't be quite so critical. And although I'm not an economist, I would assume that difference in prices between urban Auckland and rural New Zealand reflects the high cost of land and the cost of building and things like that. So, our families in Auckland are being stung, or in Wellington actually, with the very high cost of housing. I mean, bear in mind though that wages will be higher in Auckland and Wellington than they are in rural areas as well, which is probably why we haven't seen a great movement of people from expensive Auckland to cheaper rural New Zealand.
What about the idea of the government being involved? I mean, the government made a temporary choice to make public transport more affordable and petrol more affordable. Ultimately, to make this more affordable, is it ultimately something the government does need to step up to? Or can we trust, for example, bringing the third group in, that private sector can bring prices down as well? Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I think we probably all here would agree that the neoliberal experiment of the 80s and 90s hasn't worked. We're not seeing the trickle down of the money that our wealthiest New Zealanders are earning down to improving the lives of our workers. So yeah, I do think that actually it's time to give up that experiment and come back to doing things a bit more like we used to do. So looking after our most vulnerable families with well-structured social programs. I won't disagree with you there.
No,
well, I mean,
you're saying policy. Government policy is the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of chatter about the warehouse group getting involved, and they're sort of umming and ahhing about getting into supermarkets. I mean, the advantage here is it's a New Zealand-owned chain, but it's still a big chain. I guess they have the advantage of having a lot of a big footprint right throughout the country. And if you wanted something to happen quite quickly, that would be the way to do it. But is it the best way?
The food they sell in the warehouse isn't great at the moment, but I'm sure they could change that. I see that Costco is coming into Auckland, and they kind of have that model where you bring in bulk purchases of cheap things so that you can offer them fairly cheaply. So I think the warehouse could do it if they were interested, but that would be up to them. I don't know. Maybe there's something in those contracts that the supermarkets have, those secret covenants they're putting on bits of land around the city that prevent supermarket competitors from coming in. I don't know if that's affecting what the warehouse does, but you might think the warehouse could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, also they've got the infrastructure there already, don't they? I mean, we all know the red sheds. So, I mean, I was actually in the warehouse in South Dunedin in the weekend getting some boxes for storage, and actually noticed, I think they call it grocery, so it's not fresh fruit and veggie. It is basically chips, chocolate, and soft drinks.
Yeah.
But there are more aisles than there used to be. Lots of tinned fruit and that kind of stuff in there as well. So maybe there's some some soft launches, some testing the marketplace out there to see what people would and wouldn't buy. And there's your third player who doesn't need to, for example, a Coles or whatever, to come across from Australia and actually start from ground zero. They're already here. They're already in the situation. So maybe that is an answer.
I imagine that changing the fit out of their stores to be able to provide a bigger range of healthier food might be a little bit difficult for them.
Yeah.
They have to put fridges and all sorts of things like that in place.
The other comment that I see, and I guess I'm going to pigeonhole the people that I've seen making this comment, is coming from quite a privileged position of people going, oh, you just go to a farmer's market, or you get better prices at a butchery and stuff like that if you go on a certain day. And that's really hard for some families that they're in the jobs that they're working the Saturday mornings where the farmers markets are open, or it's jumping in the car to go to a bakery, a butchery, and the farmers market with the kids in tow and that sort of thing. It's not that there isn't options out there for better pricing. It's making them accessible for everyone, rather than the people that have the time and the ability to traipse across town finding these places.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys are in Dunedin, aren't you? So we have the farmers market. It's kind of a bit posh, though, isn't it? It's quite crowded. Might not be where everybody's people hang out.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we've got the Porirua, or have had Porirua markets, which are closer to low-income families and quite popular. But you're right, not everyone can make it there on Saturday morning. And not everyone has a car or the transport that's required to come to those locations. And one thing we see with the cost of food for our most vulnerable families is they often live in, our poor suburbs aren't well served by supermarkets anyway. So they're often people without cars or transport are dependent on buying food from a small local store, and the cost of food in those local stores is really determined by that supermarket duopoly who control the cost of wholesale food and who lock those small businesses out. So that is one recommendation the Commerce Commission report has made that will probably be followed through on, is a code of conduct to ensure that those small corner local neighbourhood shops do have access to that cheap wholesale food.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know some of the local stores, like small veggie and stuff stores in Dunedin actually buy their products just from Countdown. So they don't actually have the suppliers, the groceries to the, not for obviously for the fresh fruit and veg, but for the groceries, they go to those places anyway. Hey, look, we'll leave it. I feel like we've come back to, we've wrapped this nicely, come back to the duopoly being part of the issue there, Lisa. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your expertise. Health Coalition Aotearoa Food Policy Expert Group Co-Chairperson. It's a fantastic title, very long on your business card though. That is Dr. Lisa Te Morena. Thank you so much for joining us. And we really appreciate you being on BHN this morning.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there, isn't there?
Yeah. It makes you think, hey, because like as you were talking about the farmers market, for people who don't know, that in Dunedin here, there's like one of the, if not the best, one of the best in the country. It's amazing, but it's not really the place I don't think people go, other than Ettrick's Gardens, perhaps. But it's not really the place I don't think people go to save money. necessarily.
No, well,
People go there
no,
to get
they go for better quality.
coffee and a nice bit of cheese.
But I mean, when I lived in central Wellington, there was also a farmer's market, and I'd say it was a true farmer's market. It was, market gardeners coming in with a truckload of produce and parking up in a car park, and everyone going through, and that was great. I remember, being in central Wellington, you had a choice of some very expensive supermarkets, more Wilsons and New World and that sort of thing. So you just wouldn't get your fruit and veg from them. You would get it on Saturday at the farmer's market. And I know that they had ones out in Porirua as well. But that's not a fix, because so many people on low incomes are working Saturdays.
And the other thing is, like I use a local grocery store in Dunedin, but even that, I'm aware, for most people, if that grocery store is not 10 to 15, and I'm just pulling the number out of my ass, but 10 to 15% cheaper than Pack and Save, then why would someone make two stops? Like if you're at Pack and Save and you're going to get, let's say 20 or 30 bucks with a fruit and veggie, or 40 bucks with a fruit and veggie, and if the local veggie store is 5% cheaper, I mean, are you going to stop the car again, get out of the car again for $2? Of course you're not.
Yeah,
it needs to be significant.
An hour. Say you've got an hour to do the shopping, and you can do it all in the one place, rather than going 3 separate places to get a slightly better price on one particular series of items.
Yeah,
but
the good news is the grocery store is 10 to 15% cheaper, so that's why we do it. So, but it has to.
I mean, I'm just thinking of the area in town that I live in. Is not a particularly wealthy one, and they're right on the edge of town, and it's a long way to get to a supermarket. The closest one's in one of the wealthier areas in town,
right?
So a lot of them will shop at essentially a glorified dairy, rather than getting in the car and going all the way into Countdown or something like that.
And we also do get into habits. I mean, I live on the almost as far north as you can go of Dunedin before you get into rural, northern Otago. And South Dunedin, I haven't, when people move out of a big city into a small city and they go, I remember my uncle who moved from Auckland to Rotorua, and he lived around the other side of the furthest side of the lake. Mm-hmm. And all the locals would give him grief because they're like, why do you live so far away? And he was like, fuck, it's a 7-minute drive. It's like it's like a 7-minute drive. And like in Auckland, it's like a 40-minute drive anywhere. But what happens eventually is you get accustomed to that. And then it's like, fuck, it's a whole 7-minute drive. And you become accustomed to, you think, that hasn't happened to me yet in Dunedin, moving from Auckland to Dunedin, a decade ago. But I have to say, so the Pack and Save in Dunedin is probably 12 Ks from where I live, maybe 10 to 12 Ks, which is nothing really when you think about living in a bigger city. But it does feel like a job to go there. Like my local New World, I pop in there every second day and get some small stuff. What I should do if I want to save money is go to Pack and Save once a week, which is the cheapest Pack and Save in New Zealand. Every time they do a survey, Pack and Save comes out at the cheapest, and the South Dunedin Pack and Save comes out as the cheapest Pack and Save. But I should go there once a week and spend 3 times as much as my double daily shops over at the local New World.
Yeah, who's going to do that when you drive past 3 supermarkets to get to Pack and Save?
Well, so then let's ask this question. Let's be honest and ask this question: are we just fucking lazy? And how much? And no, I'm serious. And how much of this issue between food is because we won't drive past those 4? Spend an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes in the car to get the savings. We'll go to our locust, most convenient, and then bitch and whinge. How much of a responsibility do we have to that?
Can't untangle it.
No. And I guess that comes back to, if we're talking about our most vulnerable, I'm not our most vulnerable. You're not our most vulnerable. Our most vulnerable are ones that might struggle to get 12 kilometers to the Pack and Save, and they have to go to their local, as Lisa was saying. But yeah, look, we'll continue this conversation, but let's, seeing we've had a serious talk about food, let's get to a happy and healthy conversation now. Omicron. No, I'm just kidding. It's not happy and healthy in the slightest. Look, I don't want to be someone who bleats and stuff, but I'm really, really, really getting sick and tired it sounds weird. Just bear with me for 60 seconds while I get through this bit of a rant. I'm sick of people catching COVID. Now, I know that it's not avoidable and we're all going to get it, or half the country is going to get it. But what I'm saying is the people who have chosen to let down their defenses, and because the government, in my opinion, went to orange too early in the South, where we're still having spikes, that we in the South have been at 12% of the cases for over a week. So in the South, our cases haven't seen that tail down. They've stayed steady the whole time. So in that steady time, 12% of the cases with 7% of the population, the government went to orange and a whole bunch of people went, choice, freedom, which has kept it at 12%.
Yep.
I'll make it clear. I'm not talking about people who are doing the right thing and taking the right precautions and you catch COVID. I feel for you. I'm sorry it's happened to you. You're not the person I'm talking about. I'm talking about are the ones who have let down their guards, who have gone, woohoo, we can do this. We're free now. And are, in the South at least, continuing this tabletop on, not tailing down at all. And it's becoming fucking frustrating because the rest of us are almost being held hostage by the people who are not taking the correct precautions and are keeping this insidious, fucking horrible virus in our community. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I finished my rant, Joey.
That's a pretty good rant. I mean, I saw someone on Twitter the other day talking about a relative of theirs. They had COVID, but it was mild, so he decided to go surfing. Managed to smack his head on a surfboard, had to be pulled out of the water, had to be put in an ambulance, had to go to A&E. So there's a trail of people that would have been exposed to his decision-making process of like, oh, she'll be right. I want to go for a surf, innit?
Yeah, I mean,
that stuff infuriates me because I have been doing my level best to follow the rules, to follow best practice. I don't want this thing. I don't want to give it to someone. And then, as you said, you see this relaxation of rules because the business lobby and the protesters, and they're all saying, oh, it's gone on too long and we're bored of wearing masks and having to do this, that, and the other thing. And the restaurants want to open up. And it's just like, okay, well, we'll relax. Every single person that I know that has caught COVID in the last 2-3 weeks has got it from school kids. And the step down in alert levels has meant that there's not as much restrictions. And the schools have been saying, hey, look, we can't police masks. I don't know about you, mate, but I remember at school being policed to pull my friggin' socks up and to tell people to wear masks. Like, there's a lot of teachers out there that are frustrated and anxious over it. You've got the Ministry of Education going, oh, we're going to get air purifiers. Well, maybe we'll just leave the windows open as we approach winter.
Yeah.
It's too soon, and they haven't looked at it as comprehensively as they could have, in my opinion.
Look, not to defend what I just had a rant on, and because you're someone without school-age children at the moment, we are in school holidays, just in case you're unaware of that, which you are, that's good, which means we do have this natural 2-week window to break it down. I think that's one of the reasons the government went to orange, because
I agree.
Easter holidays were coming up, school holidays were coming up, but it's like, you know, I had a conversation with someone the other day who was talking about letting their kid go to a sleepover to a friend's house, and the friend had fucking COVID in their house. I'm like, what are you talking about? And it's like, it's just these decisions that are being made by people, not thinking about, like, we're going to play a clip now from an Omicron modeler. His name is Dion O'Neill from the University of Auckland. And the clip we're going to play, we'll do it now, actually. It talks about two things. It talks about people actually still need to look after each other in this orange stage. But he says at one stage, and I might pause it when he said it, he basically says at one stage, you know, people were taking caution under red, meaning now that we're in orange, people aren't. And I'm like, fuck, and I kind of feel like, I feel a bit shat on for being in a small part of the country. It's like Auckland's through it, so that's fine. Let's open up the whole country. Hang on, like, no, it's we're still 12%. We're overrepresented in the numbers down here. We need to wait a bit longer. Like orange through the school holidays, like at very best. Like our kids are back at school next term. All these things, and I just think all these people who are kind of going out and being lackadaisical on their on their masks and their precautions are the ones who are keeping it around, and are the ones who in 2 weeks' time will then pass it on to their children, which will then go back through all the schools in winter time.
Yep.
So anyway, let's just play this clip. This is from TVNZ's breakfast show this morning. I'm frustrated because I'm like, this could be dealt with so easily if people just fucking followed the science. I've told the story 3 times here about someone that I know who was living in my house, going to Invercargill, visiting their anti-vaxxer family. And I'm saying that because they identified them as anti-vaxxer, coming back to my house, telling me that all of their family had caught tonsillitis and brought COVID into my house. And these are the people who are mostly keeping it in our community now. And I'm over it. I'm tired of it. So now they're starting to talk about when is the next wave coming. And I'm like, hi, still in a wave in Dunedin, still in a wave in Southern. I think Canterbury had 17% of the cases that I looked at yesterday. And I think together the Canterbury DHB and the Southern DHB had 30% of the new daily cases. We're not 30% of the population. We're nowhere near it. So it's still out there and it's still here. So Dion O'Neill, University of Auckland, he started to talk in this conversation about people looking after each other up until Orange. He then is asked by the interviewer about the next wave, if there is going to be one. Let's have a quick listen.
In terms of hospitalizations and deaths, we do look roughly like what we'd expect, partly from the modelling and partly from looking at other countries around the world. I know part of it is people have been, and some of that's been a little bit lower than what it might have been. That's been people doing sort of more than the minimum. It's people being a little bit cautious. So people have been good, I think, about trying to reduce their risk, protect others around them. And at least until that shift from red to orange, there were people wearing masks in situations where it was recommended but not required. And
so what he just said is when it was red, people were still wearing masks, when it was recommended but not required, and now they're not. So there's the continuation of COVID in this country, but certainly in places that aren't through their peak yet. Keep going.
Sort of that general looking after those around you, and that has helped with things a bit. So we've come off a little bit better than we might have. On the other hand, we're at a plateau now. COVID's not going away. It's going to stick around in the community at about the level it's at, or at least in Auckland at the moment. Some other regions still taking some time to come down off those peaks to this sort of plateau.
Yeah, and I guess the big thing is at the moment, this whole messaging of we're open for business, we're accepting tourists now back into the country, we're in this orange setting, as you mentioned. So how concerned are you about where we could go as restrictions start to ease?
Right, so a lot of that's going to depend on people's behaviour. So at the moment in Auckland, in terms of what our daily cases are, we look about as safe as we're going to get. So this is mostly looking at what's happened in similar.
So Auckland is over it. Auckland is now at their daily total. That will stay at their daily total in a safe way. So Auckland's fine, yeah?
Places to Aotearoa overseas. We expect cases after that first wave to plateau at about 1,000 cases per day per million of population. So Auckland's down in that plateau now, between 1,000 and 1,500. And once the rest of the country joins Auckland on that plateau, you'll expect maybe 5,000 cases a day. And we sit there until something changes. And so that could be people changing their behavior and deciding, hey, I'm really familiar with this. I don't need to wear a mask anymore. Didn't get sick last week, won't get sick this week. Or I've had it once. I'm not going to have COVID again for a while. I'll be a little bit more relaxed. The other thing that will drive this will be coming into winter. So just like every other respiratory illness out there, like colds and flus that we're so familiar with, case numbers are going to go up in winter. Respiratory illness, when we're stuck inside and it's cold and damp. And then the other thing that will play a factor in what happens from here is waning immunity. So just in the same way that our protection from with vaccination wanes, your protection that you've got from previous infection, that also wanes. And while we don't have much data on that yet, it hasn't been long enough to really see what that's going to do. We expect that's going to wane at a similar speed to what that vaccination protection is going to wane at. And so that means around that sort of, maybe for that part, late winter, early spring, you've got some of that waning protection there. Maybe that's combined with that seasonal effect of winter, and maybe it's combined with people's behavior and that relaxation. And so that sends case numbers back up again. And so other places around the world are seeing second waves and third waves of when you've got COVID in the community.
There you go. I think that's given enough. And let me just bring it, and I know that this is not necessarily like a Dunedin show, but we're based in Dunedin. But to give you an idea of what he just said, what is it, 1,000 per million, right? That means for the whole country, we should have 5 million people. In the Southern DHB, there's 300,000 people. That means we should be getting 300 cases a day. There's Southern for yesterday, 771. So what should be 300 is more than double what it should be to be in that safe zone. So that's why I'm frustrated, is that we've released restrictions because other places are okay and they're doing all right, but we should be 300 a day to be in that same safe zone. We're at 771 for yesterday.
Well, even just very much focusing on Dunedin here with their high student population, one of the changes with mask mandates and stuff like that was, you don't have to wear a mask in a pub or nightclub anymore. Well, that's what our student population does. They go out and they party and they drink and that sort of thing. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the lessening of restrictions is going to keep those infections bubbling along in that population.
Yeah. I really feel let down. I really feel let down by a government who for 18 months seemed to be following the science. And then when they went from red to orange for the whole country, we're like, well, now let's follow popular demand. Like I said, if we're supposed to be safe at 300 cases a day and we're at fucking 771, why are we in orange? And I know there are a lot of people going to hear me say that and roll their eyes and go, oh, it's safe. It's 99.6, but it's like, that's not what the modeling says. So, and that's a part of it. It's like if the government has been so determined to their detriment for their popularity at following the science all the way through, then when Auckland's clear, I feel like they've gone, oh, well, that's where most of our votes are going to come from. Let's just the rest of them. You know what I mean? It just feels a bit pointed. And
it's like you've said in the past, it comes down to just at that point looking after yourself. I know I haven't changed my behavior with the change in alert levels. I went out for drinks with a mate of mine the other day for the first time in bloody 6 months. I think we had a catch up, and it was a really short list of places that we wanted to go. We ended up going to Wolf because they knew that they were still doing the vaccine pass, and they knew that they're still doing the masks and that sort of thing. I saw you had a chat with Dudley the other day. I love going to the movies. Haven't been to the movies for ages.
Yeah.
Last time I went out for dinner, I went to Emerson's. Same reason, because I knew that they were still doing vaccine passes, and I knew that they were still doing masks and table service. People like me will make those decisions based on that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And no, I didn't actually talk to Dudley. But we talked about him. So we talked about.
Oh, okay.
At Wolf. Yeah. People can look back over that. Wolf is a bar in Dunedin that kept their vaccines on. Had a whole bunch of people then criticize them for it, and they were getting bad reviews from people all over the world who had never been there because they chose as a business to operate their business as they fucking see fit. And so other people want to then comment on how they chose to run their business, which are the same people often who are the ones that are like business and don't tell me what to do and don't tread on me, are the same ones saying you can't do this in your business. Like, go fuck yourselves.
Well, they certainly weren't suffering. The place was humming.
No. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry for people who are sick of that conversation, but I had to blow a foo-foo valve today just a little bit, perhaps. A bit lighter, perhaps this last conversation we're going to have. It's not really lighter necessarily, but because it's talking about we have an election. We have local body elections coming up in the next 6 months. And then we have a national election end of next year. Well, depending on when they call it, it's typically towards the second half of next year. Yeah. And we've had conversations before here about gotcha questions and what they actually are. Christopher Luxon was talking about $50 rents going up by $50. He had a reporter or a journalist then ask him, so how much will your policies drop the rents by? And he had no answer to that question. Now, some would say that's like asking someone how much is a bus fare and how much is a litre of milk. It's like, I don't agree, because if you're citing a number like $50 a week rent, then I think it's fair to say, well, if that's the number that's bad, what's your number that's good? But I think that's okay. I think asking someone like John Key, what does a 3-stage bus ride cost, is ridiculous, and it's trying to portray him as someone who is out of touch with the common man, where I couldn't tell you what that is either. I haven't caught a bus 3 stages probably since my 20s. I don't know. So there are gotcha questions to try and embarrass people, and there are valid questions around policy and practice that you should know the answers to. Yes, you're going to say something, Joey.
Oh, I was just going to say those sort of questions, you often see them in debates and that sort of thing. And that's real easy to solve. Your assistant goes out and gets some examples. They're going to ask you about milk and cheese. Here's the price of milk and cheese today. It doesn't mean that person that is going to answer that question is in touch. They're just well researched.
Well prepared. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's this. If you haven't seen this yet, I think this came out over the weekend. The leader of the Greens in Australia, his name is Adam Brandt. Brandt. And he was asked one of these questions by a journalist based on some things he said. So is this a gotcha question, or is this fair enough? That's the first part. The second part is how he answered the question as a politician. Let's just play this for you and allow you to enjoy this as we wrap up this episode of Big Hairy News.
Talking of abject fact-checking exercises, you said in the speech that wages growth wasn't going particularly well. What's the current WPI?
Well, Google it, mate. I mean, like, I am sick. If you want to know why people are turning off politics, it's because what happens when you have an election that increasingly becomes this basic fact-checking exercise between a government that deserves to be turfed out and an opposition that's got no vision. This is what happens. Like, elections should be about a contest of ideas. Politics should be about reaching for the stars and offering a better society. And instead, there's these questions that are asked about, can you tell us this particular stat, or can you tell us that particular stat? And those questions are designed to show that politicians are somehow out of touch and not representative of everyday people. Well, newsflash, most of the people in Canberra are on six-figure salaries, just passing time until they go out and work for their coal and gas corporations and get a 6 or 7 figure lobbying job. Do you know what would be a better way?
So you ready for this? This is very clever. So he's had his rant, and now he goes straight into green policy when he says, "No, would be a better way." You ever listen?
Of showing, do you know what would be a better way of showing that politicians are in touch with the need of everyday people? It would be passing laws that lift the minimum wage. It would be making dental and mental into Medicare. It would be making sure that we wipe student debt and build affordable houses. And when you've got wages growing at about 2% and a bit and inflation growing at about 3.5%, that is part of the problem. And I would hope that at this election, we can lift the standard and turn it into a genuine contest of ideas.
Your profit tax.
Now, I'm not
on that guy's face.
I'm not too sure about. I mean, it was the National Press Conference of Australia. I don't know whether that was. I suspect he had a room full of supporters as well to help him out. But just for context, so people know, I'm just bringing it across because I looked it up while it was playing. The thing he referenced, the WPI, is the wage price index, and this is when you're talking about ticky tack kind of things. He needed to know the Australian private sector was 0.7 and the public sector was 0.7 and the original Australia was 0.6 and 2. Like, I mean, if does he need to know that?
Not going to care about that.
Yeah. So was that a gotcha question or not? I mean, I guess we don't really know because I don't know the background behind the policy he was being challenged on. But I do like the response of, in a political way, saying, what a fucking stupid question. This is what we're going to do to actually make it better for people. That's basically what he said.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be really cynical, you can go, well, he didn't answer the question. What a dodge. But he fielded that so well. Coming from, I think the guy was from a financial paper or something like that. He knows the answer. So just report the answer. I 100% agree with the way that he fielded that. Get to your own policies. Tell how you're going to change things. And I guess as a New Zealander that looks over at Australian politics and with just confusion, I hope that we hear more from him. I think they have they don't have MMP, they have preferential voting over there.
I think so. Is where you vote for 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. You sort of rank them, and the only reason that I know that is because of Juice Media's video of last week explaining it. But I mean, it does seem to be a two-party system over there, and it does seem that both of those major parties are heavily co-opted by the mineral industry, oil and gas and mining.
And saying that, when we voted, were we going to change MMP? That would have been about 2011, around that time. What I was doing for a job was learning all the stuff so I could then communicate it to my audience.
Yep.
So I got asked to come on the breakfast show, mostly because me and Petra are mates, and she was the co-host at the time, to explain, like I came on for 4 weeks in a row, explain, I can't really remember them. That's why I was like, I think so. Explaining what the different kinds of election processes were. So that's all it was about, just explaining what they were and how they worked. And I remember when ironically, in that election around the world, I think it was an election where the UK, Australia, and New Zealand all had an election either in the same year or like within 12 months.
Yep.
And all three of them, under three different systems, still had a minority government because one of the parties got 49% of the seats, one of the parties got 48% of the seats, and then there was 3% made up from independents. Because actually, it doesn't matter what system you have, you can still get that minority government. And so when you say it seems to be a two-party, I think you're right. Much like New Zealand is a two-party, but they do have numerous independents that win seats as well. But more often than not, it's not enough to move a government one way or the other. But speaking of the government, this is when they were asking about what he was going to do. These are some of his policies, and I've just written them down. So I'll give you the headlines. That him as a Green leader. I also noticed he's a Green leader, not co-leader, which I thought wasn't a green policy, but that's neither here nor there. It's more of an observation. He wants to introduce a 6% wealth tax on the billionaires to fund $7.5 billion worth of free dental, orthodontics, and mental health care. Now, that's quite a specific, right? So you can get your head around that. These ones, not so much. He's going to fix the housing crisis. That's not quite so, that's not quite as tangible, but he does also say he's going to wipe all student debt, make it zero immediately. And the other thing, which is quite specific, he's going to cut Australian emissions by 75% by 2030 and then net zero 5 years later. So by 2035, as the leader of the Greens, he wants to have zero carbon emission, well, zero net. There might be an offset within, what would that be, 35? So that's within 13 years, 12 and a half years. So that's what he wants to try and bring in, and that's what he's and that's what you heard him pivot to at the end of that conversation.
He pivoted very, very well.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, I hope we hear more about him. I mean, the thing is, as I was saying before we went to air, I like to think that I'm pretty plugged in politics wise, but the Australian system just seems to be looking through a carnival mirror a lot of the time. Is that you've got Scott Morrison. I don't know who the other guy is. Pauline Hanson's in there, and they've got a rogue gallery of just utter clowns. And this is the first time that I've heard of this guy. So, I mean, what does that say about how effectively their message is getting out? I certainly hope it's getting out to Australian voters better than it's making it across the ditch.
Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, it's also those promises that those policies that he's putting out there. As we've said before, whether it's Winston Peters or whether it's currently Christopher Luxon, it's very easy to make big sweeping statements and promises when you're not in a position of power.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't have to be called to account to do it. But then again, if they get a few seats and, the left in Australia end up getting 48% of the seats, and they've got a balance of power. Maybe some of those things they can push to getting through from their policies. That's kind of how it works. We'll put you in, you can run the country, but I want to introduce, for example, the wealth tax, and then you get a win.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the going into our elections next year. There's one question that I want to hear from reporters when they've got these people talking about their policies. Is I want to hear how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
It's the single biggest thing that I want to hear from anyone.
So what I just said, how are you going to fix the housing crisis? That's the question to them. Yeah.
You can't just make a statement that says the current lot are really bad at this and we're really good without hearing but how? How are you going to change it? I hope we hear it.
On the chat, a major factor in Labor's last time was the fear of coal mine closures in what was traditionally Labor heartland, meant they lost key House of Representative seats. And that's the other thing about the going to zero carbon. What does that mean? That's the end of coal mining, does it? Or how are they possibly going to offset that? So there's a question, I guess, for them to ask. And I guess just to also wrap the show, I'm interested in Jussie. Moved to Dunedin 5 years ago from Titarangi, which is where I lived in West Auckland. Love having less rain. I do very much miss the Avondale markets. I know exactly what you're talking about out the back of the race course. We used to also go to the Otara markets as well down outside MIT. Fresh produce is hit and miss here. Yeah, so we're trying to grow our own. Yeah, the thing about growing your own in Dunedin is unfortunately the climate is not the best. If you're up in the central, it's different, but in Dunedin, the climate's not the best. In fact, unless, of course, I mean, there's got to be some more traditional veggies and stuff that grow better in this climate because, you know, you're not going to grow bloody orange trees here, are you?
Let me tell you about Swedes.
Kumara. Be good. Hey, we're back again tomorrow, aren't we? You're back with us tomorrow? Is that
man. Yep.
The Tube-meister?
Yep.
And yeah, I guess onwards and upwards. We've got a bunch of stuff still from the weekend that I'd really like to talk about. Really like to talk about this Arise Church situation that's going around at the moment. I've spoken to both David Farrier and Logan Church, who's the TVNZ journalist, in the last 24 hours. We might pick up on that because as someone who's got a lot of their church in their background and still has a lot of friends and family, well, not family, but friends and connections within that world, it's like I know TVNZ is really talking about interns and being overworked at the moment. There's apparently more to come, so that's not the full story. Or at least I got to say the accusations, right? Because although, and I'm not saying this in a critical way, but although people like David Farrier sell what's happening as fact, and I'm not saying it's not fact, I'm not defending anyone. It's like, well, I will always use the word allegedly until it's proven. That's what I will do. Not to say what he's saying is not true, but you know, there have been some accusations made purely on that one, the TVNZ angle at the moment, which is about interns being overworked and stuff. I'm like, dude, you guys don't know the church culture. I mean, that's every church in New Zealand. I don't know what it is now because I'm not really involved anymore, but there is horrific stats around how churches and Christian organizations, like parachurch organizations, they call them, using I'm going to be careful with the word abusing because that makes it sound like, you know, hitting, but using and abusing people's time. There was a stat that went like youth workers in church last 3 to 5 years and then they burn out. And it's because of how much they're expected to work or how much they do work. You know, I know of parachurch organizations that, so if you were getting paid 50 grand, right, you have to pay a certain amount of, the business has to pay a certain amount of PAYE. I know of parachurch organizations that will say we're allowed to give you a third of that straight onto your credit card, and if we do, we don't have to pay PAYE. But rather than putting $17,000 on their credit card, they will put on $12,000 on your credit card because you wouldn't have seen that other $5,000 because it would have been PAYE. So rather than using it as a way to kind of, let's use one of the words to kind of bless that person and say, so you'll get more, they do it as a way so we can pay less. I know of church leaders who have done random acts of kindness in their neighborhood to someone's house that was a bit shoddy and needed cleaning up. So the whole church, so this leader got together and the whole church was fired up to do this, bless these people in their neighborhood, and they cleaned up their section and they even painted their house. And then within a few weeks, that church leader put their house on the market that was in that same neighborhood. So guess what? The shoddy house from the neighborhood had disappeared. So this is I know I worked for an organization that at some stage before I was there was taken to court because they were using volunteers as full-time workers, and the court had to tell them, you must pay these people. Legally, you're not allowed to do it. This is when I see a headline that talks about workers in churches or church organizations being overworked, I'm like, that's every church on some level and every parachurch organization. So to me, that part of it is like, that's almost kind of there's some things to come that I've been told about which haven't been released yet, so I won't put them out there yet. But because I've been talking to people who are doing the writings and stuff. But if that was all it was, most people who are involved with the church would be, phew, no pedophilia. You know what I mean? Because it's like just overwork. But it's people get, especially when you're not, and I've said this before about you know, it was the Will Smith thing. When you cite your God as your reason for doing something, then you're unchallengeable. When you employ someone and you employ them under the auspice of you're doing this for God, then you can do whatever you want to them. And then if they have to work an extra 10 hours that week, it's like, well, you know, you're doing it for the Lord, so you know that's okay. So yeah, it's shocking. And I have to also say I have worked with and do sometimes still help out with, very rarely, an organization who is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Who work in a way that they actively have a mission statement that goes, we pay people as much as we can, not as little as we can get away with. But the sad thing about that is what they're acknowledging is many in the church world or in the Christian world pay people as little as they can get away with. That's what they
100%.
do. So I've got, as you can hear, we're not even talking about it, and I've got a ton to share on that. I will constantly and still use the word allegedly and alleged until, you know, I even if someone's accused of stuff, it's like until you're convicted in a court of law, or unless I have first, like if you've done it to me, I have first-hand experience, I will say, or like my family, so I know, I will use the word allegedly purely out of semantics. And, you know, to be honest with you, there when you broadcast things, there's defamation and there's that kind of stuff that go with it. But mostly I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, because everyone, no matter how much of a fucking asshole or dirtbag they are, is afforded their right of being innocent until proven guilty. Now, I'm not saying that because anyone's innocent. I don't know. I'm just saying that's how I will always operate. Yeah. You want to jump in on anything there, Stu? I didn't mean to.
I would love to get my teeth into talking about the Rise Church and their very similar brethren, but we'll, as you say, keep our powder dry for tomorrow, eh?
All right. Well, maybe we'll touch on that tomorrow. I might have actually. Why don't I have a? I know this is really unprofessional, but maybe I do have something set up for tomorrow. Let's have a look. If I can do this, then I can tell people that we can come back in tomorrow. Let me see. Later in the week. So that's Logan Church from TVNZ. We'll maybe talk later in the week. That won't be tomorrow. But yeah, we can pick up on this tomorrow. Mind you, later in the week, it's Wednesday tomorrow already, isn't it? Yeah. Cool bananas. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being with us.
No worries, man. It's been great.
Share our shit if you're watching. There'll be a clip coming out today, at least one clip. I had 2 rants today. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll put out that information there about the affordable foods. So if you follow either me, look, I can do this, Chewy, because we've done this before. Hang on. If you follow, here we go, look at that. If you follow either of us on Twitter, then you will get to see some of the clips from today, because when I put it out, I'll tag Chewy in, and I'm sure Chewy will fire it out there as well. That's what we sort of do.
Yep.
And then you can pass it on. You can share our shit. And other than that, we will be back tomorrow from 11 a.m. Talking through and about some of the big news stories of the day and week tomorrow. So until then, my friends, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chewy, for being with us again. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no worries. Pleasure.
And we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Hooroo!